She just wanted to survive the flight. Tired, humiliated, alone with a baby in her arms and the weight of the world on her shoulders, Emily Carter never imagined that one simple gesture amid the chaos would change her entire life. Because sometimes, it's in our weakest moments that destiny reveals its strength, and when she fell asleep on a stranger's shoulder, little did she know she was resting on the shoulder of the man who would change everything. This is not a story of rescue. It's a story about seeing beyond appearances, about shared pain, about courage in the midst of vulnerability, and about a love that begins when no one else is watching. Do you believe in encounters that change everything? If you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and tell us in the comments, where are you listening to this story from? Your like really helps this channel grow and continue bringing emotional stories like this. Share it with someone special. The cabin lights were softly dimmed, casting a golden glow on the tired faces of passengers trying to sleep on the overnight flight from Los Angeles to New York. Most were dozing off with neck pillows, eye masks, and thin blankets up to their chests, but at one of the last seats in economy class, the peace was broken by a persistent, high-pitched cry. Emily Carter, 23, was trying, for the 30th time, to calm her 6-month-old daughter Lily, who hadn't stopped crying since boarding. With red eyes, deep bags under her eyes, and her body practically collapsing from exhaustion, she whispered with a hoarse voice, "Please, Lily, Mummy's here, calm down, my love, but the sweet words weren't enough. The baby's cries echoed like an alarm through the seats, drawing impatient sighs, cutting glances, and even a few comments whispered loudly enough to hurt. "This is a flight, not a daycare," complained a man in a wrinkled suit 2 rows behind. "I don't know how they let people like this on board," muttered a woman in a beige blazer, crossing her arms in indignation. Emily heard it all. Each word pierced her skin like needles. She held Lily tighter, trying to protect her from the world, but feeling more exposed with each passing moment. The shirt she was wearing still had milk stains. Her hair, tied in a messy bun, betrayed the lack of time and choice and of a life that never stopped for a minute. She hadn't slept in almost 2 days. The morning before, she had worked as a waitress at a roadside diner until midnight. She left the shift with swollen feet, a throbbing pain in her shoulders and a tight heart, knowing that she'd still have to take 2 buses to get home. Instead, she rushed straight to the airport with Lily in her arms, carrying a patched-up backpack with a few diapers, a change of clothes, and a thin blanket. The ticket was bought with what was left of this month's check. She paid in cash, after saving up tips for weeks. She had no idea what awaited her in New York, just that she needed to try to start over. The big city was scary, but it seemed to offer something she couldn't find in Los Angeles anymore: hope. But on that flight, in that moment, all she felt was despair. A flight attendant approached with a fake professional smile. "Ma'am, you need to calm your baby down. We have passengers trying to rest," she said in a polite tone, but without any compassion. I'm trying," Emily replied, her words trembling on her lips. The flight attendant looked at the baby, then at Emily, as if she had already given up on the situation. She sighed deeply and walked away, leaving a trail of judgment in the air that felt heavier than the baby's crying. Emily closed her eyes for a moment. Everything hurt: her body, her heart, her soul. She wanted to disappear. She felt invisible, and at the same time watched as if she were a walking mistake. It was as if the world was saying with silent stares, "You don't belong here." But she had to endure. For Lily. For herself. She tried to sing a soft melody, but her voice came out hoarse, broken. Lily was still restless, with red cheeks, clenched fists, and eyes full of tears from crying. Emily was about to get up and go to the bathroom, where she might be able to calm her daughter away from the cruel looks, when an unexpectedly calm voice came from beside her. "Can I help?" She turned slowly, surprised. Beside her in the window seat was a man she had barely noticed before, now looking at her with a serene gaze. Tall, in a well-tailored dark suit and perfectly styled brown hair, he seemed out of place in this cramped corner of economy class. His eyes were a deep blue, but it wasn't the color that caught her attention. It was the way he looked at her. There was no judgment, only kindness. "Pardon?" Emily asked, her voice almost inaudible. "Can I hold your baby for a moment?" "Maybe I can calm her down, Anne, if you want," he said with a slight smile on his lips. She hesitated. She didn't know this man. She was exhausted, vulnerable, and her motherly instinct told her not to trust so easily. But there was something in his posture, in his tone, that conveyed security. "I understand if you don't want to. I have nephews, and believe me, they could make a ruckus when they wanted to," he added, chuckling softly. Emily looked at Lily, who was now sobbing between cries. Then she looked back at the man. Something inside her, maybe instinct or maybe desperation, led her to extend her daughter toward him with cautious movements. "Thank you," she murmured, not knowing exactly why. The man took Lily with surprising gentleness. Resting her against his chest, the baby seemed to settle almost immediately. He began rocking her gently, making a soft sound with his mouth. In less than a minute, the crying stopped. Emily was speechless. She stopped crying," she said, almost in disbelief. "Sometimes all we need is a new pair of arms," the man replied simply. Gradually, the chatter around them died down. The plane returned to its almost sacred silence of the early morning. Emily sank into her seat, still tense, but with her heart beating just a little more slowly. "My name is Nathan. Nathan Walker," he said, extending his hand without letting go of Lily, who was now peacefully asleep in his arms. Emily Carter," she responded, shaking his hand. "A pleasure, Emily Carter. And this little one here?" he asked, looking at the baby with tenderness. "Lily," she said with a shy smile. Nathan nodded, observing the peaceful face of the baby. Emily didn't know what to say. She was used to being invisible, to walking past people who looked away. But this man not only noticed her, he chose to be there, in the same row, on the same flight, in the same chaos. She rested her head against the backrest, her eyes beginning to close. For the first time in a long time, she felt safe. Not because everything was solved, but because for a brief moment, someone truly saw her. And there, on that crowded flight, among strangers and silent judgments, something unexpected began to emerge, a silent connection, delicate, but real. And Emily had no idea how that moment would change the course of her life forever. The reclaimed silence in the cabin was as fragile as a thread of silk about to snap. Emily remained slumped in her seat, her body defeated by exhaustion, but her mind still alert enough to observe the stranger, who now cradled her daughter as if he already knew her. Nathan held Lily nestled with an impressive ease. His movements were gentle, and his chest rose and fell in a calm rhythm, exuding a peace that, by some miracle, seemed to transfer to the tiny body of the baby. Emily, still, surprised, tried to understand what had just happened. How was it possible that a child who had been crying for over 40 minutes calmed down so quickly in the arms of a stranger? She watched every detail, the way he hummed almost imperceptible melodies, the care he took when holding Lily's little head, the attentive gaze even as he appeared relaxed. "Do you really have nephews, or did you just say that to convince me?" Emily asked with a tired but genuine smile. Nathan let out a quiet laugh, never taking his eyes off Lily. "I do. 2, actually. Twins. They're my older sister's kids. They taught me a lot about handling cries, tantrums, and patience." "Patience is a gift," she murmured more to herself. For a few moments they sat in silence, the kind of silence that doesn't bother but rather embraces. A comfortable silence between two strangers united by an unexpected situation. Nathan finally turned to her, his expression gentle. "You know, a lot of people don't understand what it's like to travel with a baby. They think it's a lack of control, bad manners, but they don't see the effort. The silent struggle that happens here," he said, pointing to his chest. Emily felt a lump form in her throat. Those words were like a hug she hadn't known she needed, a rare recognition. "That's exactly it," she said, looking away. "Sometimes it feels like all I am now is a walking mistake. A girl who got pregnant too young, a mom who doesn't know what she's doing. Nathan furrowed his brow slightly. I don't see any of that. What I see is a young woman who, despite everything, is here, fighting, caring. That takes courage most people will never know. Emily wasn't used to this kind of affirmation. Most people saw her situation as a consequence of bad choices. No. One told her she was brave. No one looked at her the way Nathan was looking at her now. I'm sorry if I was rude earlier, she began. You weren't. You were trying to protect your daughter. There's nothing nobler than that. His voice was calm, deep. There was no rush in his words, just presence. A presence that made Emily, even sitting on a crowded plane, feel less alone. And you, Nathan, what do you do for a living? Besides, calming strangers' babies, she asked with a shy smile. Nathan hesitated for a second, as if carefully choosing his words. I work in social development, a foundation. We try to help people in vulnerable situations, especially women and children. Emily nodded, not suspecting anything. She thought he must be some sort of assistant, maybe a psychologist or volunteer. The expensive suit seemed out of place with the simplicity he conveyed, but she was far from guessing who this man really was. That is admirable, she said sincerely. I've been very lucky, and I believe that those who are lucky have an obligation to look out for those who haven't been. That phrase kept ringing in her head. Luck. It wasn't a word Emily often used. Her life had been marked by loss, sacrifice, and forced choices. Luck was waking up and finding enough milk for Lily. Luck was catching the bus on time. I don't even know what I would have done if Lily hadn't managed to sleep. She confessed, absent-mindedly adjusting the strap of her bra under her wrinkled shirt. Some days I feel like I'm hanging by a thread. Nathan looked at her with tenderness. There was something in his gaze that went beyond empathy. It was as if he were seeing something she herself had forgotten, a strength she hadn't realized she had. I understand. More than you think. Emily didn't ask what he meant by that. There was something in the way he spoke that suggested there were untold stories behind all that confidence. But for now she simply allowed herself to be embraced by that unexpectedly gentle presence. Soon after, Nathan returned Lily, now asleep, to her mother's arms, with careful movements. Ready for a well-deserved rest, he said, adjusting the blanket over the baby's little body. Emily thanked him with a look. There weren't enough words to express her gratitude. For the first time in many weeks, someone was helping her without asking for anything in return. She leaned back in the seat again. Lily, now calm, slept soundly in her lap. Emily's head felt heavy and her eyes began to close without resistance. If you want to sleep for a bit, feel free. I'm here, Nathan said, so naturally it almost felt like an old friend. She hesitated but then gave in to the fatigue. She gently rested her head on his shoulder. She could smell a subtle, woody fragrance. The warmth of the contact was comforting, almost familiar. For the first time in a long time, Emily allowed herself to relax. Her heart beat at a different rhythm, no longer racing with anxiety or fear, but cradled by a rare stillness. She didn't know how long she would be able to sleep, or what would happen when the plane landed. But in that moment, something inside her, perhaps the most wounded part, felt a quiet relief. Nathan remained still. He watched the mother and daughter as if he were admiring a delicate painting. There was something about this woman that touched him deeply. The firmness in her eyes, even amidst despair. The instinctive way she protected her daughter. The way she tried to smile, even when everything inside her screamed for rest. He didn't know yet why that connection affected him so much, but he knew with a strange and serene certainty that this encounter wasn't random. Outside, beyond. The airplane windows, the sky was beginning to take on bluish hues. The night was giving way to a new day. A silent new beginning was unfolding, without hurry. And as the plane cut through the clouds, two lives followed side by side, bound by something neither of them could explain, yet. Emily woke up to the slight tremor of the aircraft and the warm sensation on her shoulder. For a second, she didn't know where she was. Her head rested gently on something firm, and as she lifted her eyes, she realized it wasn't the support of the seat, but Nathan's shoulder. The subtle, woody fragrance she had noticed earlier was still there, mixed with the leather scent of the seat and the fabric of his blazer. Startled, she tried to discreetly pull away. "I'm sorry. She murmured, blushing. Nathan simply smiled, not moving. "You were exhausted. You stayed calm the whole time. Don't worry about it." Emily looked at Lily, who was still sleeping deeply in her arms, her lips slightly parted and tiny fists clenched. The peace on her daughter's face contrasted with the storm of emotions now flooding the mother's chest. "I'm not used to sleeping like this around strangers," she said, trying to explain herself. "And I'm not used to letting strangers sleep on my shoulder," he joked. "But I didn't think this was the time to make rules," she laughed, surprised by her own reaction. The tension that had built up began to give way to something different, a kind of shy comfort, an emotional pause, as if, for a few minutes, that cramped airplane cabin had transformed into a sanctuary. "How long has it been since you've had a proper sleep?" he asked, genuinely curious. Emily sighed. 36 hours, maybe a bit more. I had 2 back-to-back shifts at the restaurant, went straight to the airport after." Nathan frowned, impressed. "And even so, you're here, taking care of your daughter, fighting with everything you have." She shrugged as if there were no other choice. "When you're a mum, you just do it. No one prepares you, you know. People think it's instinct, but there's so much pain in between, so much guilt, so much fear of failing all the time." He nodded respectfully. He didn't try to interrupt or soften it. He just listened. "Her dad left when I told him I was pregnant. He said he wasn't ready, that he was too young for this. I was too, but someone had to grow up." Emily laughed without humor. "The ironic part, I was ashamed to tell my own family. My sister, well, we haven't talked since then. She judged me before she even understood. And still, you moved forward," Nathan said, almost in a whisper, "not because I wanted to look strong, but because I had no choice." She stared at her hands for a moment, her eyes fixed on her short nails with chipped polish. "I don't even know who I am anymore, other than Lily's mom. Sometimes I wonder if there's still an Emily inside. For if everything got swallowed up by the routine, the rush, the overdue bills." Nathan stayed silent for a few seconds. Then he spoke, his voice low. "Sometimes, in the hardest moments, that's when we're becoming more of who we really are. Pain shapes what the rush hides." Emily looked up. She hadn't expected an answer like that. It touched her in a different way. It was as if he were seeing layers that even she couldn't explain. "And you?" she asked, changing the focus. "Has your life ever been turned upside down?" He hesitated. Then he rested his elbows on his knees and intertwined his fingers. "Yes, many times. But the most significant was when my mother passed away. I was 23, almost your age now. She was everything to me. She raised me and my brother alone, worked 3 jobs, slept on the subway, always smiled when she got home, even exhausted." Emily held her breath. "I've never met anyone like her. Strong, stubborn, loving. When she left, it felt like the ground left with her." He swallowed hard. "But it was in that pain that the foundation was born. I wanted to make sure other women like her would get help, that they wouldn't pass through life unseen." Emily felt, her eyes burn. There was too much truth in those words. Pains that somehow resonated with hers. "It seems like our mothers have something in common," she said with a half-smile. "Mine is still alive, but it's like she's always distant. She's never looked at me the way I expected. Like she was saying, 'I'm proud of you.' Sometimes love is there, but in the wrong way," Nathan said. Emily nodded, emotional. "Sometimes I just wish I'd hear a 'you're doing great.' Then let me tell you." He turned to her, looking into her eyes. "You're doing great, Emily." Those words broke through all the defenses she had built. For a moment, Emily had to look away so he wouldn't see the tears threatening to spill. But Nathan didn't say anything else. He just waited, with respect, with presence. The plane started to shake slightly with turbulence. The seatbelt signs lit up, and the sound of the announcement to fasten seatbelts echoed through the cabin. Emily carefully adjusted Lily, making sure the baby's seatbelt was secure. Nathan moved a little to give her space, but his gaze was still there, firm, warm, gentle. "Are you visiting someone in New York?" she asked, trying to shift the mood. Nathan hesitated for a moment. "Let's just say I have an important appointment, but nothing that can't wait." Emily frowned, curious, but didn't press the issue. The descent was already noticeable. The turbulence gradually stopped, and the captain's voice announced that the plane was starting to approach for landing. People began to move, lifting the window shades, gathering their belongings. Emily took a deep breath. She had no idea what awaited her after disembarking. A new borrowed address, maybe a cheap motel for 1 or 2 nights, an awkward reunion with her sister, if she had the courage to show up at the wedding, and after that, perhaps another job. Search, another public school for Lily, more sleepless nights, more silence. But there was something in that moment she wanted to keep, something that had nothing to do with promises or solutions. It was the memory of someone who didn't look away, who saw who she was, not just as a mother, but as a person. "Thank you for everything," she said, looking directly at him. Nathan smiled. "I was just in the right place at the right time." Emily nodded, but inside she felt there was more, so much more, and maybe she would only discover it once they landed. The plane began to descend faster. The lights of New York were already visible through the window, like a golden liquid mantle stitched into the dark. And as the city approached, Emily felt that, even without knowing, something was about to change, something much bigger than she had imagined. The plane touched down gently at JFK Airport, and for a few moments everything was silent, as if the passengers collectively held their breath during the impact of the wheels on the tarmac. Then the sound of seatbelts being unfastened, phones being powered back on, and passengers moving to retrieve their carry-ons filled the air. Emily adjusted Lily carefully, trying to keep the baby's sleep intact despite the bustle. She still wasn't sure how to thank Nathan for everything. Part of her just wanted to get off the plane and move on with her life, trying not to get attached to that brief connection. But another part, deeper and more scared, wanted to extend that moment as long as possible. Nathan helped with Emily's worn-out backpack, handing it to her with a restrained smile. "Got everything?" he asked, as if offering more than just a practical gesture. "Yeah. I mean, everything that fits in this backpack," she said with a brief smile. They walked side by side down the narrow aisle to the terminal, where the crowd split in a rush and distraction. Emily, still with Lily in her arms, felt out of place in the sea of well-dressed people and tired faces. They all seemed so certain of where they were going. She, on the other hand, only had a vague idea of how to get out of there. When they stopped, near the terminal exit, Nathan hesitated. He looked at her as if searching for the right words, not the generic ones, but the ones that could break through the defenses Emily had carried since she became pregnant. He then handed her a card. "If you ever need, or if you want to talk, here it is." Emily took the card carefully. It was elegant with matte paper and gold lettering. At the top it read Walker Foundation, and just below the full name, Nathaniel A. Walker, CEO. She blinked, then read, "Kate again," and then the silence between them fell like a bucket of cold water. "CEO?" she asked, her tone wavering between surprise, skepticism, and discomfort. Nathan seemed prepared for it. He nodded, calm. "Yes. You're the director of a foundation," she insisted, as if trying to force her brain to understand what her eyes were reading. "Of the Walker Foundation. We create social projects across the country, housing programs, job training, community daycare." Emily took a step back. Something in her expression changed. The look of relief and trust that had formed throughout the flight began to dissolve like fog in the sun. "So that's why you helped me? Because I'm a case for your foundation? A poor woman with a baby in her arms?" Nathan stepped forward, concerned. "No, Emily, I didn't know anything about you when I offered to help. I just saw a mother fighting alone, and I wanted to help. Like any decent person would. But you're a CEO," she repeated, as if that negated everything they had experienced. "You could have been anywhere on that plane, in first class, with the other executives. Why were you in economy?" Nathan took a deep breath, visibly frustrated. Because I don't like the distance first class creates. I like to be where I can listen, see, feel what ordinary people go through. I'm not pretending to be someone I'm not, Emily. Everything I did was sincere. She looked at the card in her hands, then back at him. The lump in her throat tightened, as if she were about to choke on her own emotions. You should have told. Me? And if I had told you, would you have trusted me? He shot back with honesty. Emily didn't answer, because deep down she knew the answer. I thought you... She started but didn't finish. The words got lost in a sea of old wounds. Suddenly, all the times she had been used, judged, discarded, surfaced. She felt deceived, vulnerable, as if she had emotionally undressed in front of someone who, in the end, also had too much power. I thought you were different, she said in a whisper. But you were just watching me as part of a project, a profile for your next impact campaign. Nathan tried to approach, his voice soft. Emily, please. None of this was about work. It was about you, about Lily. About what I felt there on that flight. She stepped back as if she needed to place a physical barrier between them. I don't want your pity. I don't want to be another number in your donation report. I'm not an ad face, I'm a mother, I'm a person, and I'm all I've got. The words came out with so much force that even a few people around them looked. Nathan, for a moment, was silent. Not because he had nothing to say, but because he understood that at that moment she didn't want to hear anymore. Emily turned, holding Lily tightly against her chest, and walked toward the exit. Her steps were quick, determined, but inside every cell hurt. The cold New York wind hit her as soon as she crossed the automatic doors of the terminal. Outside, the city's chaos seemed like a reflection of the whirlwind inside her. She had no idea where she'd spend the night, no concrete plan, just a motel name a co-worker had recommended weeks before. And yet, nothing hurt more than the feeling of having trusted, of having opened up, of being seen, and now feeling exposed. Nathan stood still in the same spot for a few seconds. Then he put the backup card back into his pocket. There was pain in his eyes, but also something else, a silent promise. He wasn't the kind of man who gave up easily, and something inside him told him that this encounter wasn't over yet. But for now, Emily disappeared into the New York crowd. Swallowed by honking horns, hurried steps, and the urgency of survival. And in the meantime, the card was still in her hand, crumpled but not torn. The motel room smelled strongly of disinfectant, with a yellowish light that couldn't hide the peeling paint on the walls. The bed creaked with every movement. The sheet was too thin to protect from the cold that seeped through the poorly sealed window, and the shower released lukewarm water that was more bothersome than relieving. Still, to Emily, that small space was all she could call home that night. Lily slept, wrapped in a blanket on the only bed in the room, with her pacifier still hanging from her mouth. Emily sat on the floor, leaning against the wall, hugging her knees. She watched her daughter with a mix of guilt, love, and exhaustion. She tried to stay strong, but the disappointment she felt inside was silently slipping from her eyes. On the nightstand, Nathan's card was still there. She hadn't thrown it away, even though she had considered doing so several times. She picked it up once more, running her fingers over the embossed letters of his name. It was a beautiful, elegant card, a sharp contrast to the place she found herself in. CEO, she murmured, as if the word still hurt in her mouth. She wanted to believe that everything that had happened on the plane had been real. That, the looks, the words, the care for Lily had been sincere. But how could she trust that now? How many times had she believed someone who promised to be there and then disappeared? Lily's father had also started with promises, saying he would take responsibility, that she wouldn't be alone, that it would be different. And then silence, absence, cowardice. Emily stood up and walked over to the sink. She filled a plastic cup with water and drank it all in one go. Then she stared at her reflection in the small, cracked mirror. She barely recognized herself. The girl who dreamed of becoming a nurse, of having an apartment with a balcony, of adopting a dog and traveling the country. Now she was a woman marked by sleepless nights, a body with no time for itself, scars no one saw, and yet There was still an echo of the old Emily inside her, a weak but resilient voice saying, "You're still here." Suddenly, a soft knock on the door startled her. Emily furrowed her brow. Who would be looking for her here? She walked slowly to the door, looked through the peephole, and her eyes widened. "Jessica?" she murmured, even before opening the door. Her sister stood there outside, holding a bag on her shoulder and a strange look on her face, a mix of hesitation, shame, and something that seemed like regret. Emily opened the door cautiously. "What are you doing here?" Jessica took a deep breath. Can I come in?" There was a brief silence. Emily stepped back a step, allowing her in. Jessica entered slowly, as if stepping onto sacred ground. "How did you find me?" Emily asked. "Suspicious. Nathan looked for me." Jessica answered directly. Emily froze. "Of course he did," she murmured. "Trying to fix his mission," Jessica shook her head. "No, he looked for me because he cares about you and, frankly, because he's desperate." Emily turned her gaze away. His name still triggered her. "He told me what happened on the flight and how you reacted," Jessica continued. "But I didn't come here because of him. I came for us." Emily crossed her arms. "Since when do you care about us? It's been almost a year since you called. Me irresponsible, a shame to the family. I've managed on my own, Jessica. With Lily in my arms crying, afraid, hungry. And you? You turned your back on me." Jessica took a deep breath, her eyes welling with tears. "I was pregnant too." The words fell like a stone in the silent room. Emily's eyes widened. "What?" "I was pregnant, Emily. I found out the same week you told me about Lily, but I lost the baby a month later." Her voice faltered. "And I felt anger. Anger at you. Anger at the universe. Anger at myself. It wasn't fair. You had nothing. And still your pregnancy went on. I had everything. Health insurance, stability, a husband, and still lost." Emily brought her hand to her mouth. Her heart raced. "I never knew about this," Jessica nodded. "Because I didn't tell you, I distanced myself. I judged you to protect myself, but the truth is, I was so envious. And it consumed me inside." Emily sat on the edge of the bed, still in shock. "I thought you just hated me." "I never hated you. I just didn't know how to deal with the pain. And today, seeing you here, with your daughter, facing everything with such strength." Jessica kneeled in front of her. "Forgive me, please." Emily didn't respond immediately. Her sister's words were like needles and bandages at the same time. They hurt, but they also healed. After a long silence, she murmured, "I missed you too." Jessica smiled, emotional. The two embraced, tightly, truthfully. For the first time in a long time, Emily allowed herself to cry on the shoulder of a family member. After a few minutes, Jessica stood up and took something from her bag. "Before I forget, Nathan asked me to give this to you." It was a newspaper clipping. Emily took it, curious. In the article, there was a picture of a younger Nathan next to a smiling woman, clearly his mother. The headline read, "Founder of the Walker Foundation honors his mother with National Project for Single Mothers." Emily read every line carefully. The story talked about Nathan's humble childhood, his mother's struggle to raise 2 children alone, working 3 jobs, lacking stable housing, spending nights sleeping on the subway bench. It all felt too familiar. At the end, a highlighted quote caught her attention. "I don't help out of charity. I help because I know the pain of having no one, and because my mother taught me that every human being deserves dignity, even in the midst of chaos." Emily felt a shiver. This wasn't marketing. It wasn't manipulation. It was truth, and she knew it, because she recognized in his eyes the same silent pain she carried. Jessica watched her in silence. "He's not trying to save you, Emily. He just saw you for who you really are." Emily looked at Lily, still peacefully, asleep, and for the first time since she left the plane, she allowed herself to consider that maybe, just maybe, not everything was lost. Emily sat back down on the bed of the small room, holding the newspaper and feeling her heart race. The words in the article echoed inside her as if they had been written specifically for that moment. Nathan's story wasn't just similar to hers. It was a painful mirror of what she was living now. A single mother, 3 jobs, judgmental stares, closed doors. Jessica remained silent, respecting the moment. In her eyes, there was a mixture of relief and admiration, as if she were seeing her sister in a new light, a new strength she had never recognized before. Emily read the article again, mentally highlighting each phrase that revealed not just Nathan's background, but the root of his empathy. He wasn't a cold CEO, shielded by wealth. He was a man who had grown up in discomfort, who knew the shame of relying on public shelters, who had seen his mother sleep in shoes to avoid the cold on cracked feet. The images the article painted were intense. Nathan as a child accompanying, his mother in the housing system lines, helping wash dishes at the restaurant where she worked, pretending to be sick so she could miss work and rest for a bit. It wasn't pity, it was survival in family. It was love in its rawest, most honest form. Emily remembered the way he had held Lily. There was no rigidity, no discomfort. It was a gesture trained not by technique, but by experience. And the phrase he had said on the flight now made even more sense. Sometimes all we need is a new set of arms. Arms. He knew what it was like to grow up without one, and that's why he offered his own whenever he could. He told me this story years ago, Jessica said finally. The first time he showed up at the company, I thought he was just another rich guy looking for good publicity. But he was different. He came to our NGO, looked the women in the eyes, heard stories that would make any executive uncomfortable, and he cried with them. No shame at all. Emily bit her lower lip, trying to control her emotions. I never imagined someone like him could understand this, she said, pointing to Lily, to the environment, to her own life. Jessica nodded. I think he saw you. Because he saw his mother in you. That phrase hit deep. Emily stood up and walked over to the window. Outside, the street of the motel was dark, with flickering streetlights, cars passing sporadically, and the muffled sound of a distant siren. New York was noisy, alive, impersonal, and yet there was something different about that night. And why did he call you? She asked without looking at her sister. Jessica smiled lightly. He wanted to know if you were okay. But more than that, he wanted to understand what he had done wrong. He was desperate. He thought he had ruined everything. Emily turned around. And what did you say? That he needed to be patient. That you're someone who doesn't trust easily, and rightly so. And that maybe, if he had the courage to show his vulnerability, you would really listen. Emily looked back at the card. It was still there even after all the confusion. Maybe because part of her never wanted to get rid of it. Maybe because, deep down, she hoped there was something real behind it all. He didn't try to buy me, you know, she said, almost in a whisper. He just listened, without rushing, without pity. Jessica smiled. That's already more than most people manage to do. Emily sat down again. I thought I would never see anyone look at me without judgment. Everyone sees me as a statistic. Just another girl who messed up, a teen mum, a social burden. But he saw you as a woman, as a warrior. Jessica finished. Silent tears ran down Emily's face. There was no exaggerated drama, no crisis. It was just her body finally relaxing at the possibility that maybe she wasn't so alone after all. I don't know what to do, Jess, she confessed, her voice hoarse. Part of me wants to run to him, but another part is terrified of believing again. Jessica moved closer, holding her hand. You don't have to decide now. But don't close your heart before hearing what he still has to say. Emily nodded without responding. The next morning she left early with Lily in the stroller. The sun in the city barely managed to peek through the tall buildings, and the wind carried the smell of coffee, smoke, and concrete. Emily walked aimlessly, but something guided her. She passed by a newsstand and bought a cheap coffee. Then she walked to a small park with worn benches and trees dried from the end of winter. Lily slept, and Emily watched the hurried couples, heading to work, the elderly reading newspapers, the nannies pushing strollers just like hers. And then she took out her phone. Nathan's card was still in her pocket. She typed the number but didn't call. She just stared at the screen, her thumb hovering over the green call button. Would he answer? Did he still want to see her after everything? Coward, she whispered to herself, putting the phone away. But deep down, it wasn't cowardice. It was caution. It was trauma. Still, she knew that silence between them wouldn't last forever. Hours later, Emily returned to the motel and found an envelope under the door. Her heart raced. She looked around, no one. She picked up the envelope and with trembling fingers opened it. It was a letter. Emily, I didn't know how to say what I need to say looking into your eyes, so I write. You're not a case, a statistic or a social project. You are a woman who showed me what real strength is. On the flight I saw your pain, and I also saw your courage. Maybe you don't know it, but your presence awakened something in me that I haven't felt in a long time. The desire to belong, and not to a position or a foundation, but to a story, to a family, to you and to Lily. Don't want to invade your life. I just want a chance to walk by your side with respect, with truth, with time. I'll be at Astoria Hall at 7 p.m. at your sister's wedding. If you decide to show up, I'll be there. Nathan Emily read and reread the letter until she had memorized every line. And then she looked at Lily, who was staring at her with curious eyes. What now, little one? Should we go or not go? The clock read 6:42 p.m. when Emily looked at her reflection in the motel bathroom mirror. She barely recognized the woman in front of her, not because of the subtle makeup trying to hide the dark circles, nor the navy blue dress she wore with understated grace, but because of her eyes, the firmness in her shoulders, the lighter breath even though her heart was still racing. The dress had been borrowed from Jessica. It's simple, but elegant, her sister had said, helping adjust the straps on Emily's slender shoulders. A delicate necklace completed the look. It was little, but it was everything. For someone who had come from where she had, being here, dressed, determined, with her daughter in her arms, was an act of courage. Lily wore a white dress with embroidered flowers, and her little hair was combed with a tiny headband. She slept peacefully, wrapped in a light blanket. Emily held her carefully, as if carrying her daughter was also carrying the reason for being there. Outside, the New York night glowed with intensity. The lights of the cars, the shop windows, the bustling sidewalks, everything seemed to conspire in favor of a new beginning. Astoria Hall was located in the heart of the city, inside an elegant hotel. When Emily reached the entrance, she felt her legs tremble. The doorman looked at her with discretion and made a polite gesture, opening the glass door. Inside the lobby, everything seemed straight out of a fairy tale. Crystal chandeliers, red, carpets, floral arrangements in shades of white and gold. The soft sound of a string quartet filled the air with harmony and sobriety. Well-dressed people mingled in groups, toasting, smiling. For a moment, Emily felt out of place, as if she had intruded on a space that wasn't meant for her. But then she looked at Lily and remembered she had every right to be there, not just as the bride's sister, but because she chose courage, and courage doesn't ask for permission. It walks even while trembling. Jessica saw her from afar and rushed to meet her, her eyes watery. "You came?" "I came," Emily said with a small smile. Jessica took her sister's hand warmly and led her through the crowd of guests. "He's here. He's been waiting for you." Since he arrived, he hasn't taken his eyes off the door. Emily shivered, and then she saw him. Nathan was next to the piano wearing a perfectly tailored dark suit, but there was something different about him. His hair was a little tousled, his hands restless, his eyes fixed on the entrance. And as soon as he saw her, he stopped. It was as if time had slowed down just for him. Their eyes met, and for a moment, all the noise around them disappeared. Nathan took a step forward, hesitant. Emily did the same. Each step she took was a silent affirmation. "I choose to face the fear. You came," he said in a whisper when he finally stood before her. "I read your letter," she replied, holding Lily more firmly. "And I needed to look into your eyes to understand if it was real." Nathan stepped closer, with care. His eyes were misty. "It's real, Emily, all of it. You, her, what I felt. I didn't know it would be like this. I didn't plan anything. But since that flight, nothing else made sense without you." Emily lowered her eyes for a moment, trying to hold back the emotion. "I was harsh with you, but I've learned to distrust everything, everyone. I built walls to survive, and I'm not here to tear them down forcefully. I just want to be by your side, to wait, to be support, not a burden." She looked at him again, and in that look, there was something beyond words, a quiet surrender, a silent request for reciprocity. "Do you know what you're getting yourself into?" she asked with a half-smile. "I have a daughter. Diapers, sleepless nights, unexpected cries. I don't want to save you, Emily. I want to walk with you. And with her," he said, looking at Lily with a glimmer in his eyes. "And if tomorrow I'm broken again, then I'll sit beside you and wait for the day to pass. And when you're ready to start again, I'll be there. Again. Always." Emily closed her eyes for a moment, took a deep breath, and then, gently, she extended Lily into his arms. "Then let's start now. Hold her. Let's go in together." Nathan took Lily with surprising tenderness, as if he were receiving a piece of Emily's very soul. And when the little one opened her eyes and looked at him, it was as though something sacred had sealed between them, without any ceremony. Just presence, truth, love. They walked together into the ballroom. The curious glances didn't intimidate them. Emily now held her head high. She was no longer the exhausted woman from the flight. She was a whole mother, a strong woman, and, perhaps for the first time, someone truly loved. Jessica watched from afar, smiling with pride, and as the couple blended into the guests, ready to celebrate not only the bride's wedding, but the birth of something much greater, Emily felt something inside her blossom. For the first time, there was no longer just hope. There was peace. But their story was just beginning. The fine rain trickled down the windows of the modest house in the suburbs of New York. Inside, the scent of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the soft sound of a radio playing old tunes. Emily sat on the living room carpet with Lily in her lap, smiling as her daughter laughed at her own awkward attempts to clap her hands. Nathan entered the room holding 2 steaming mugs. He was barefoot, wearing an old T-shirt, and his hair was tousled, so different from the elegant CEO Emily had met on that flight. And yet, in that moment, he seemed more whole, more real than ever. He handed her one of the mugs and sat beside her. "Did you sleep well?" he asked. "Like a rock," she replied. "It's the first time in a long while I've woken up without fear of the next day." Nathan leaned his shoulder against hers and fell silent, watching Lily play with a piece of colorful ribbon. "You know, I thought all I had was my work, the foundation, the awards, the meetings, but none of that ever gave me this peace." Emily looked at him with tenderness. "And I thought I was just here to endure life, never to truly live." They exchanged a glance. There were no promises being made, no grand speeches. But there was something more powerful: presence, decision, mutual care. That house wasn't big. The exterior paint needed repairs, the furniture was donated or second-hand, and Lily's room was still improvised. But there was life, there was warmth, there was a future. Being built piece by piece, Lily let out a happy squeal and clapped her hands. Emily and Nathan laughed together, as if that sound were the melody guiding all their steps. Later, while Lily took a nap in her crib, Emily walked through the kitchen, organizing some clothes. She found Nathan's letter envelope on the table. She read it again, silently. It was strange how words written so carefully could touch deeper than 1,000 empty gestures. And how, in the end, what we desire most is not grandeur, but truth. Jessica had become a constant presence. The reconciliation between them grew slowly but solidly. Sunday lunches, late-night texts, advice exchanged between sisters who had learned to see each other with new eyes. Emily didn't forget the past, but she no longer lived shackled by it. She had learned that forgiveness wasn't a favor, but a liberation. As for Nathan, he didn't promise to fix everything. He didn't invade. He didn't try to control. He just stayed, On the good days and the harder ones too. Over time, Emily began helping with small projects at the foundation. First, by supporting other single mothers, then leading conversation circles. She still didn't know if she would go back to school, or if she would ever become a nurse, like she had dreamed in her teenage years. But for the first time, she felt like she had choices, and that alone was an enormous victory. On a grey Wednesday afternoon, while walking together through the park with Lily in the stroller, Emily gripped Nathan's hand more firmly. "You know what I realized today?" she asked. "What?" "That there is no perfect fairy tale, but there are real stories, the ones that hurt but also heal, and that sometimes the happy ending is just the beginning of a lifetime of learning to start over." Nathan smiled and kissed the top of her head. "I choose to start over with you. Every day." And it was there, among trees still bare from winter and the distant sound of children playing, that Emily realized all of it, the pain, the turbulent flights, the sleepless nights, the confrontations with the past, hadn't been obstacles, but paths. Paths that led her to where she needed to be, and though the future still carried uncertainties, she knew she would never face them alone again. After all, what started with a simple gesture of kindness on a random flight had transformed into the most improbable and truest home her heart had ever known. And maybe, just maybe, the most real love is the one that is born when no one is trying to impress, only to stay. She wasn't looking for a prince, not for wealth nor promises. She just wanted peace, and she found it, not in the right places, but in the most unexpected ones. Not because she was saved, but because she was finally seen. This story reminds us that sometimes love doesn't come with fireworks, but with silence, care, and presence. The truest connections are born when two souls recognize each other in pain. And a simple gesture, like holding a baby during a turbulent flight, could be the start of everything. What about you? Do you still believe love can come when you least expect it, or have you stopped waiting? If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and tell us in the comments, where are you listening to this story from? Your like really helps this channel grow and keeps bringing you more emotional stories like this. Share it with someone special.